Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of Irish Illustrated Overtime. I'm Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated with Drew Mentock and John Brice, and we recently recorded a Irish Illustrated instant analysis outside Notre Dame Stadium. We're going to expand upon that a little bit. Week 3 is in the books for Notre Dame of 2025 spring. We saw the quarterbacks throw. We saw about 60, Marcus Freeman said about 60 live plays. Some of it was 7-on-7. We'll differentiate some of that among the three top quarterbacks. Blake Hebert, of course, threw as well. But JB, jump in here and start us off with what stood out to you most today. What is most important in your mind to tell Notre Dame fans about the scrimmage we saw today in the Irish Athletic Center?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to say is that, no, we don't know a starting quarterback. All three had some very strong moments today. All three had some moments that made it clear there's not a starting quarterback to be named at this time. And then to me, the overarching theme is that it was incredibly hard to evaluate the quarterbacks, especially for us lay people, because the Notre Dame offensive line is just so decimated by absence and injury, and the latest being Gerby Lambert done until the fall with a labrum injury that required surgery. And so, look, Kenny Minchey threw a pick. He had a really good day until he threw an ill-advised back foot throw onto the wide side of the field. But he had shown some great mobility, some strong elusiveness, I thought, and also made some heady decisions. I thought C.J. Carr in the 11-on-11 overall had the best day. Honestly, I thought one of his best plays was when he extended a play after one of the many serious instances of pressure, extreme pressure by the Notre Dame defense. He was able to backpedal, roll to his right, and throw a ball down the sideline that the defender got a hand on, but didn't make the play. It would have been a sensational pick, but it was most importantly not a devastating sack, and then he had a late touchdown throw. Angeli was the best in 7-on-7. I didn't think Angeli was as good in the team setting. And then my defensive MVP was Jason Onye. I referenced this in instant analysis, but his journey is obviously continuing to unfold and is well documented, all that he's overcome to be back and a viable component of the team. But most importantly, like, he played with grown man strength today. And the best matchup of the day, the best good-on-good matchup consistently of the day, in my opinion, was Jason Onye against Charles Jagasaw, and I would give Onye a win today. So those are the key elements. Only one field goal attempted. Noah Burnett pushed it just left. It was only a 28-yard attempt. You hate to see that, given that this was a team that had a stretch last year that missed 8 of 11. But Burnett told me last Saturday he's recovering from injury. He feels good. He's getting his leg back into form. He didn't use the golf swing analogy, but it was very clear he's rediscovering his swing. And Marty Biaggi told me yesterday he's incredibly encouraged overall by Burnett's spring.
Drew, I think we all, at some point we were impressed with each of the quarterbacks, including Blake Hebert. I would have, until the interception thrown by Minchey by Isaiah Dunn, stepping in front of, I believe that was Elijah Burris. I would have said that Minchey had the best of the day among the quarterbacks, because he hit some really nice, some deep out routes. I thought he threw those extremely well. I think it's obvious that if he were to win the job, he would be the guy that they would do a few more design runs for. He did have a short touchdown, but just your overall thoughts on the quarterback play that we saw today in the IAC.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you guys have been talking about. I do think it's worth noting after practice, Marcus Freeman said that with the offensive line kind of being in flux and a lot of new guys who are giving up a lot of pressures, he said that shouldn't impact their evaluation process. I don't know how much to fully take him at his word on that, because from my perspective, it's pretty difficult to evaluate. And I do think the biggest thing I saw from those three main guys is that it really does put a guy like Steve Angeli kind of at a disadvantage, because he's not as mobile. He doesn't throw on the move as much. And if you're going to you have maybe one, maybe two guys in there who might really have a chance of starting this fall. And so if that's not who he's going to be playing behind, that's not necessarily the best way to evaluate him. As you mentioned, when they went on 7-7 with Angeli, the defense was mostly playing zone. And I thought he looked excellent there, just anticipating throws open, knowing when to dump it off, when to not. And I don't think the other two, especially Carr, I would say that was probably his worst period of practice. Was during 7-on-7 when he just didn't quite. He made some nice throws. He had one over the top where he kind of dropped it over the top of the defense to the second level. But other than that, I think he focused too much on dumping it off and missed some throws downfield. So overall, I agree. Yeah, Minchie had a really good day, and his mobility really shined through, and I think he had some really good runs. I mean, I know he could like to compare himself to Riley Leonard, and I think even though they were just wearing helmets and shoulder pads today, you saw how he can use his mobility very similarly.
Yeah.
And it's not as much of a stretch as maybe I thought when he initially said it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I had the same reaction when Marcus Freeman was saying that the offensive line, shouldn't really impact the quarterback. It does. I mean, it clearly did today, but I understand where he's coming from. And John, let's jump back into that offensive line. And the main number one offensive line was Matty Augustine, the early entry freshman at right tackle. Charles Jagusa was playing right guard. He did go down at one point with an ankle injury when they were running goal line, and they worked on him a little bit. But when practice ended, he was back in there. The center was Joe Otting. The left guard was Sullivan Absher, who's a guy that is certainly contending and competing for a starting spot. And then Styles Prescott, who essentially missed his entire freshman year, is getting looks at left tackle. But the term I used in the instant analysis was it was kind of a jailbreak many times, especially the last play of the scrimmage, which CJ Carr beautifully turned into a downfield in the end zone touchdown pass to Elijah Burris. But it was difficult for the quarterbacks. And Drew, I think you make a good point that it's worse for Angeli when that's the situation. And, that's something to consider a little bit when a decision is made for the fall, because we did see Angeli run one time, and we saw, it's just Carr has more maneuverability than him, and Minchie certainly does. But John, that offensive line is quite patchwork at this point of the spring.
Yeah, look, it's not Matty Augustine's fault that he's having to take first team reps at right tackle 3 months after he was in high school. That's just the reality of the situation with Emil Wagner on the Barry Bonds spring plan of getting the leather recliner in the corner, so to speak, and not really taking any live snaps because the guy took 1,000 snaps in the longest season in the history of college football. And then the injury to Gerby Lambert. And if you saw Matty Augustine on the street, you would see why they like his frame. You also would ask if he was an offensive lineman or a tight end. He clearly he has got to add weight and strength, but he moves really well. He does some nice things there. There was a play, I wrote this down, or Styles Prescott, I think it was, that Bryce Young beat him so badly that, he could have ended a quarterback's career if this were a real game. It was just one of the – it was Owen Strebig. Excuse me. It was Owen Strebig that he did this to. And we all remarked, Mentock, myself, and Pete Sampson, did Strebig even get a hand on Bryce Young as he blew by? He did graze him about like I would graze one of Tim Prister's fastballs, which is to say not very well. So Bryce Young, just an excellent move. And I did notice on that play, he was in one of those wider stances that we've heard Chris Ash deploying, the defense using more and more zone. Marcus Freeman talking about that today. But again, when you're those quarterbacks and you're working behind two guys that you believe will truly factor into the present of Notre Dame and not the future, being Sullivan Absher and Charles Jagusa, it is tough to know how to filter all of that information. I will say early in the scrimmage setting, we did see design runs for all three quarterbacks, and I thought that was probably Mike Denbrock trying to help his offensive line out for later in the day by putting that in their minds that they would let all three quarterbacks run. And again, they were designed runs that they utilized, quarterback draws into the middle of the line by all three quarterbacks in the early session of the scrimmage or the live portions of today's practice, however you want to term it. I thought Carson Hobbs had some good moments. I thought Luke Talich and Tay Johnson both did some things at safety. Adon Schuler just looked so in command back there. And then we saw Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed as the opening two linebackers. And every single time the third linebacker onto the field was Kingston Billy Amuasa, and then Jaden Osbury as well. Extreme depth. I mean, almost an embarrassment of riches, in my opinion, for Notre Dame at the linebacker position. But there was very little about the offense today that made you ooh and ah. Eli Raridan, a 40-yard catch and run on a beautifully called interior tunnel screen to the tight end from Mike Denbrock, and I think it was Carr who made that connection. I can't remember for sure without looking directly at my notes, but Raridan, a couple of really nifty moves, and he coasted / was shoved out of bounds inside the 10 in a live game setting. I think he turns that up and probably trucks the defensive back and gets on into the end zone. Aeneas Williams ran it hard today. I thought Kedron Young ran it hard today. Jadarian Price early in some drills just showed some great straight line speed on kickoff return, but not a huge day for the running backs, in my opinion, guys.
Yeah, for the record, that actually was Minchie.
Okay.
And Raridan showed some real evasiveness, running his way through traffic. And I do want to say, for the record, again, we're talking about the offensive line, and I mentioned the number one line. The number two line was right to left. Owen Strebig, Devin Houston, the former defensive lineman, getting some snaps there. Early entry freshman Cam Herron, Peter Jones at left guard, and then the left tackle was walk-on Robbie Woolen, who's coming off an injury. So it was not I mean, it was patchwork at best. I see we're getting questions about the receivers. There was a ball thrown by Steve Angeli that was slightly behind Cam Williams. It was a slant. Cam Williams has to make that catch.
Yeah,
it was behind him. It had a little bit of heat on it, but he still has to make that catch. Drew, you and I made some comments before they scrimmaged about how quick we thought Logan Saldate looked. Very quick-footed. The other receivers, Elijah Burris had the touchdown late, but he had a really bad drop right in front of us, actually kind of right underneath, looking down from where we were sitting. KK Smith made some plays. One of CJ Carr's better throws was a up and in route to KK Smith. We didn't really see a whole lot of Micah Gilbert was taking reps, but he has those broken fingers, so he would go through the rep, pretend like he was catching a ball thrown in his direction, but they're letting those fingers heal. But I thought Burris, that he was wide open. He broke free on the touchdown pass, but the drop with the conversation going to drops by the wide receivers brought up by Mike Denbrock when we spoke to him a couple weeks ago. You're on the lookout for those kind of things. And so, some of those passes could have been thrown better, but a guy like Cam Williams is in a position where he's got to make those plays if he's going to dent the depth chart in 2025.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, I think there's no safety there on that Cam Williams drop. So if he catches that and then can get with his speed, that could be the type of play that's a touchdown. And that's the type of thing when you want him on the field that you want him to be able to do. So you're right, it was behind him a little bit. And he's also one, I was watching all the wide receiver drills when it was just Coach Brown throwing to them. And he also had a drop on like maybe an 8-10 yard hitch too. So I think that's still, he looks better. He definitely looks more comfortable with his body control and things like that, but he definitely could improve with his hands. And I remember the Burris drop as well. He also, I think that was in 7-on-7, and he made a really nice move to get open on that too, and then just couldn't come down with it on the sideline. I think Will Pauling, who had some drop issues last year, I believe, when he was at Wisconsin, he had one of the better catches in terms of I think this is also 7-on-7. He caught it over the middle and took a hit, and they hit him pretty good, and he didn't have any issues holding on to it. So I thought that was a good sign there. Other than that, I don't remember too many other significant drops. And KK Smith, as you mentioned, he had one really nice one where CJ Carr had to bail out to the right. He was only about 5 yards downfield, and Carr just whipped it to him kind of down to his lower hip. And he was well contested, and he held onto the ball. And it was maybe slightly just CJ trying to get something done when he was getting frustrated with the pressure he saw, and KK still made it happen. Yeah. I was impressed with it.
If I could real quickly on that, I thought that was low key, maybe CJ Carr's best throw of the day before his last one was the way he was able to be flush right, throwing off platform on the move and putting it where either KK Smith made the catch or nobody made the catch. And KK Smith had a defender absolutely draped on his back. The Cam Williams drop was bad. Angeli threw it on his back hip instead of leading him, and it was a deep slant. So he had beaten Cree Thomas and was really going to have an absolute clear path, maybe a foot race, but he was behind Cree Thomas on the slant. And so a catchable ball for sure. If Angeli leads him and he's able to catch it in stride, great chance it would have been a touchdown. I think I only counted 3 true drops in the 60-ish or so plays of actual live scrimmage time today. And the one thing about Burris, after he had gotten open and then had a bad drop, they went right back to him 2 plays later, and he caught the very next pass. And I don't think he had a drop again the rest of the day. That's some pretty strong mental toughness for a mid-year enrollee true freshman.
We did see. Go ahead, Drew.
I don't have specific stats, but I think Burris might have made the most catches today out of everyone.
He certainly was targeted the most. There's no doubt. So, I mean, that in and of itself is promising. But, John, you had mentioned Carson Hobbs, and, I think there's some young DBs here, mostly safeties. I guess safeties. Nick Hobbs is playing some nickel. Ben Minnick has been getting some nickel reps along with Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith was held out today with a bit of a leg situation. It's nothing serious, Marcus Freeman said, but Carson Hobbs was getting number 1 nickel reps. We talked to him the other day. He's very confident in his abilities, and I think that he's flashing those. I thought Tay Johnson flashed. He had a tackle for loss in addition to playing on the back end. And then Marcus Freeman said that he's done a good job of grasping what they're doing back there, which is really promising. We've been talking about Luke Telich, and of course, Luke Telich is firmly in the mix along with Kennedy Urlacher, who, as always, shows up, does something positive, made a tackle near the line of scrimmage. It might have been a 1-yard gain, but it was a kind of run that could have gone for a little bit more, and he upended the running back. But Cree Thomas defended a deep ball to Jerome Bettis Jr. Tay Johnson looked good. Carson Hobbs looks very comfortable out there, and Urlacher. So, some of these young DBs really flashed to us. We haven't seen, we've seen so little. What we have seen has just been, drills run against air. And so to see these guys in actual competition and for them to stand out a little bit, that's really encouraging, because Xavier Watts isn't walking through that door unless he's coming to visit.
Yeah. Tay Johnson, to your point, he did have a TFL. He also had another tackle very early in the live scrimmage session where he met the ball carrier either right at the line of scrimmage or a half yard in front or a half yard behind. But 2 really good tackles. One where he darted in and filled the gap and made a very sure tackle of bringing down the running back and getting him down in a hurry. And earlier stuff, and again, we did continue to see the defense deploy some zone coverages today, and Marcus Freeman saying that's going to continue to be an element. They believe it enhances the defense to have that ability to switch into some zone stuff at different times, and they believe they have the personnel to do that. Early in the drills, I watched the defense in some goal line throwing sessions really work on picking up underneath routes, rub routes, and communicating well and making sure that they were talking and not clogging each other up with the traffic lanes. So I thought that was key, because you could see some good communication, and you frankly could just see a defensive unit, especially in that back 7, that while they were doing these drills, they felt comfortable. They all knew what they should be doing. They were communicating well. Luke Telich communicating well, and just passing coverage off if they needed, passing guys off if they needed to, or sticking with their man and making it difficult for the offense.
We haven't really said this, but we ended up speaking for about 26 minutes with Marcus Freeman afterwards. Before we go fully into that, Drew, anything else from the scrimmage? And again, we'd encourage everybody to check out Irish Illustrated's instant analysis. There's some repeat going on here, but anything else from the scrimmage that you'd like to bring up? And then let's talk a little bit about what Marcus Freeman had to say to us.
Yeah, I think the only couple things I'll just add, I think with the young defensive backs, I think what's really should be encouraging is just how physical they are too. Like the Cree Thomas, Ethan Long, some of those guys, they're longer, kind of skinnier guys, but Cree Thomas, I mean, if anything, he's too physical, too aggressive. And I think as a coaching staff, they probably want that mentality, which they can walk back, as opposed to guys being like, hey, you need to get in there and mix it up a little bit more. And I know we didn't see much out of the running game. I was kind of thinking back on it, encouraged for as much as there wasn't room for Price to run at times. He wasn't just bouncing stuff outside and stuff.
Yeah,
he was really
I agree.
his whole and wasn't trying to do too much, even though like this would seem like a time where it could almost reinforce some of those bad habits, because there probably isn't much for him to do this spring in terms of just like open holes. And he seems pretty committed today to sticking with what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, I should mention, Drew, that Jeremiah Love was running a route. I believe that's when it happened. And I think we all just saw him kind of go to the ground. My first reaction was knee, but it wasn't. It was hamstring. And we didn't see him take a snap again, nor should we have. And he was limping a little bit, but I think he just tweaked the hamstring a little bit. And as we said on instant analysis, that's probably the last we've seen of him taking a rep, because after tweaking his hamstring, I wouldn't anticipate, like, you don't want any kind of setback going into the summer. And you're finishing spring earlier than normal. Like 2 weeks earlier than normal with the Blue Gold game on April 12th, but you want him going into the summer as healthy as he can be and getting stronger. So he was sidelined. We mentioned Devontae Smith. We didn't see Donovan Heinisch. Emil Wagner was dressed but did not participate. No surprise. I think we mentioned here that Jagusa had the right ankle, but he came back into play. And then, Gerby Lambert, that's disappointing, because, with the labrum injury, it's still a huge, important summer for him, but now he's dealing with coming off of surgery. So that's unfortunate. As we get into the stuff, Drew, with Marcus Freeman, I brought up to him Jalen Sneed, who was getting all the number one reps with Bowen, and then Billy Amuasa rotated in there, and Eli Raridan had the big 40-yarder where he weaved his way through traffic. And I asked about them because, there was a moment during last season where we weren't sure which direction Jalen Sneed was going to go after the Louisville game, but he hung in there, remained very productive. And Marcus Freeman said that they had a conversation, and Jalen Sneed clearly said, I want to spend my last year at Notre Dame. And he's now up to 235. According to Max Bulla, things are looking good for Jalen Sneed.
Yeah, I thought Marcus Freeman seemed quite candid about that was clearly a discussion about, like, if he was considering going elsewhere and transferring out. But if you're going to stay, like, you should commit to doing these things to be great. I think he mentioned, like, he's always been a great talent, and now I think we're finally seeing more of him becoming that great player. And I agree. I mean, he's definitely up to 235, and he doesn't look a step slower either. I mean, he was still making plays in the backfield today, riling people up. This is the best he's looked, and Marcus Freeman said this is the best he's looked, and I think from what we saw today, he confirmed that. And I also thought, as you mentioned, Eli Raridan, I mean, he had that screen, but, like, he was running away from, I think it was Junior Tuialamaka was, like, right there with him, and he just kind of pulled away from him. That turned what could have been like a 10-yard gain into a 35, 40-yard gain that got him right to the goal line too. So I think we saw some of that explosiveness and them being willing to do some different things with him that I don't think they did in the past.
Yeah, and speaking of doing some different things, the zone coverage came up, and clearly we saw instances where they were running it more, and Marcus Freeman was asked about it. And this is a direct quote, you can't play man all the time, but that's essentially what Notre Dame was doing. Maybe they played a little bit less in their last game against Ohio State, dictated by Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith. But, and I understand where he's coming from. And we've heard Chris Ash echo the enhance word. And as great as Notre Dame was under Al Golden playing man, and nobody's criticizing Al Golden, but when you want to enhance, that means that you're more well-rounded in everything you do, and that would include pass coverage. And there are instances where it just makes more sense to be in zone, and Marcus Freeman essentially admitted that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think, he also mentioned like guys like Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, like they know they can get, those guys will play man and be physical and stuff like that. And I think this probably is some, like we're doing different things in the spring. And I think we saw even going to that game against Ohio State, it's like, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to only play man, but then they haven't done zone all year. And I think it kind of puts you in a position where either you're telling guys, where like, hey, we don't believe in you as much because we've been doing this all year and we're going to take away from it now. And also just they're not as experienced with zone as they would have been. So I think it does make a lot of sense to, even if they presumably go back to where man is the primary thing, you also want to work it in. So when they do need it and it does make sense, they're not at a point like, what do we do? And is this the right call?
Well, right. I mean, there are situations where it just makes more sense to play it to just, okay, especially like third and long, just keep the football in front of you and force the punt. So I think that's all good stuff. Some of the, we talked about widening the strong side defensive end sometimes that Chris Ash talked about. That certainly makes sense. He wants to, every coach wants to funnel the play to the middle. But, when you widen that defensive end a little bit, the defensive ends like that because they feel like they get a better get off and a little bit more running start, and they can defend the edge a little bit better. So I think Chris Ash has done a really good job of truly just enhancing and making it a little bit better. And he was always clear from the beginning that he wasn't going to try and reinvent the wheel that Al Golden put in place. So that's all good. Jason Onye played really, really well, didn't he? I mean, I know, JB gushed about him a little bit, but I agree. Jason Onye looked really, really good. Now, I'm sure that, they're like Jared Dawson's going to be in the starting lineup. He wasn't running with the ones, but when transfers come in, you don't want to just throw them into the number one role. But the way Onye played today, I mean, whether he starts or not, it looks like Jason Onye is going to be the guy that's really going to contribute.
Yeah, I mentioned in instant analysis, like there was a period of practice where during 7-on-7, which was like right in front of us where we were sitting up on the balcony, on like the other end of the field in the end zone, they were doing one-on-ones with the offensive and defensive linemen. And you could just, whether I was trying to watch or not, you could see just Onye kind of exploding in some of those drills and winning reps, or even the one I saw him lose to Jagasaw, like he still drove him back, like, 5 yards or so. And I think there was some, he's up listed at 308 and he certainly looks bigger. And I think with him being away from the team too, there was some like, is that bad weight? Al Washington said it wasn't. And I think we got to confirm today that it's not. And we saw Dawson get in there a little bit. I thought he made some plays too. I mean, he's still going against some of the, the makeshift offensive linemen currently, but he moves well for his size. He's also very long. I noticed even just interviewing him the other day, I think I'm about his height, and I feel like his hands were still like extended further than mine, if that makes sense. Like he feels, even though he's a short kind of like rounder guy, like I feel like he has a lot of length to him that probably surprises the guys going against.
Some of the other personnel that we saw in there, Cole Mullins is a guy that I know that people may remember. I've talked about him because I thought he flashed in preseason camp last year, and then he suffered a knee injury. They had him on the interior at that time, but he was playing some defensive end today. I can picture a play that he made where he fought off a block and made a tackle on a run play. I know that Al Washington was not happy with Armel Mookum's pad level one time. I don't know if you caught that or not, Drew, but he was halfway on the field making sure that Armel Mookum brought his pad level down. We saw Brennan Vernon inside. I know people have asked about Brennan Vernon. I love Brennan Vernon coming out of high school, and he got some run with the second team today. But when you ask about specific individuals and you get the coach speak, I'm just not sure that he's putting himself in a position, especially with, Elijah Hughes, the transfer from USC is in. We saw him in there. It's Sean Sevillano got some reps at nose tackle, so it's very competitive in there. We, just as an aside, and I thought it was a good question by Austin Huff from the South Bend Tribune, a little bit off the beaten path, but it was something that I think we all wanted to ask Marcus Freeman about, because since the last time we talked to him, his son Vinny Freeman has verbally committed to wrestle at Cornell. It's kind of interesting because the roles are reversed a little bit. Now he's the dad asking questions of the school and his son. And he said the question he had for his son, Vinny, was, why do you want to commit? Vinny had indicated to him that, hey, I want to commit to Cornell. And he, it's pretty much what we hear all the time about guys that commit. They feel comfortable with the people, the coaching staff. You blend well with the other participants in your sport. And Vinny Freeman is off to Cornell when his time at Penn High School in Mishawaka, Indiana is over.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too that Freeman was very willing to, which is what Austin asks, is like, what do you learn from this as somebody who deals with recruiting? Yeah. And Freeman was very upfront that this is things that he was relaying to the staff throughout the process. Like, this is kind of what's going on. And when he, as you mentioned, when he was ready to commit, he said he was like, why are you ready to commit? And what is it about it? And he was just like, his son said, the people, like, this feels like family and stuff like that. And he said it was a really good reminder that, like, it's important to figure out who the decision makers are, which in this instance, it was more so his wife than Marcus Freeman, because she was the one going on a lot of the visits. And then also what is really most important to this student athlete. And Marcus Freeman, I don't think he's always been a pretty good recruiter, but I think it's interesting that even he was like taking this as a learning experience as well.
Yeah. Now, there was a question asked of Marcus Freeman about recruiting in North Carolina, and probably not everybody in the audience was aware of why that question was being asked. But while we were, I don't know exactly when Ebenezer Iwutade verbally committed to Notre Dame, the defensive lineman from North Carolina, but he verbally committed to Notre Dame this afternoon. It's a huge catch. Go to Irish Illustrated and see our coverage of him. I wrote a film review, which is always enjoyable when a guy is as good as that. But the question as it relates to North Carolina, Notre Dame has absolutely created a pipeline to North Carolina, and a lot of these guys are on the defensive front, including Bryce Young, of course, who's already begun to establish himself. And Iwutade, the verbal commitment today, and there's going to be another decision made by a North Carolina defensive end by the name of Rodney Dunham on April 10th. And I think we pretty much expect at this stage, him to choose Notre Dame as well. But there is some significant talent from North Carolina that's coming Notre Dame's way.
Yeah, and I think the question was like, what is it about North Carolina? And Marcus Freeman always goes back to, like, we're looking for the best student athletes that in the country that also fit this place. And so I think that was interesting. That was his remark, because clearly there is something about, I think a lot of these players come from maybe like the Charlotte area too. So something about those institutions and the talent that's there that seems to fit Notre Dame well. But he obviously can't get into any of the specifics about the recent recruits. But if you look at what they got committed today, and Bryce Young and maybe Rodney, that's
Rodney Dunham. Yeah.
Rodney Dunham, like, quite an impressive talent from that all along the defensive line from a pretty small area of the country.
Well, I'll tell you what, if they can pair up Iwutade and Dunham at defensive end, which is really how they slot, Dunham probably a little bit more strong side guy, and Iwutade clearly a viper, just growing into his body. Some of the early film on him, like when he was a sophomore, he was 6'3", 180. He was a wide receiver just based upon what they looked at. And the head coach and the defensive line coach said, hey, why don't you line up here at defensive end? Let's see how this looks. And he's really grown into his body now. So that's a big catch for Notre Dame today. Drew, anything else? Between this and our Irish Illustrated Instant Analysis, I think we've pretty much hit everything that we wrote down here today. What else? Anything else?
A lot of notes, definitely more that I'll get to in the offensive practice report. I finish after that.
I'm
There's a lot of
going to let you jump on that for Irish Illustrated subscribers tomorrow. I kind of sat back while John Brice and Drew Mentock were doing offense and defense. I sat back to take some other notes, and I'll have my thoughts down on paper, so to speak, for tomorrow. But I think we've covered it pretty well, Drew, today. Until next time, Tim Priester, Drew Mentock, also speaking on behalf of John Brice. This has been Irish Illustrated Overtime.